Welcome on in, football fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with our Monday Night Football preview for tonight's game between the Falcons and the Eagles. Gonna break down how to attack it from the Showdown perspective, as well as 4 props over there on Underdog and Prize Picks that I'm attacking for tonight's game. So a lot to talk about. Let's not waste any time at all. Go ahead and start it off with a look at the DFS side of things. Our first order of business is going to be the injury report, where the one massive thing to keep an eye on is AJ Brown, who's already been rolled out for tonight's game. That's going to have an impact on who gets the ball out there for Philly, but also some of the snaps that you see out there at the wide receiver position. On top of that, you've also got Johnny Wilson, wide receiver over there for the Eagles, is questionable, so a little bit thin over there at the skill position there. So you've got Devonta Smith, an obvious target at only $8,800, but also some of those backup wide receivers, a Jahan Dotson, that's going to see a huge increase in projection, and potentially some guys down here. I mean, Johnny Wilson, if he plays, could be a value play. Paris Campbell out there for the Eagles, or even a Britton Covey could be in play out there in a few lineups. The other thing we want to take a look at before we go player by player would be the game scripts out there for tonight. And given that the Eagles are 5.5 point favorites, even 6 points out there in a few sports books, that is going to be the prevailing narrative. You're going to see a lot of Eagles heavy lineups. I'd imagine the most popular build tonight will probably be a 4-2 Eagles build, and even 5-1s, which usually would be a little bit lower owned, and this full onslaught type of lineups are going to be a little bit more popular tonight than what you would probably see in the past. So if you agree with that sentiment, which personally I gotta say I agree with the Vegas sentiment that the Eagles should be favorites tonight, then you might want to be a little bit different about how you approach some of those Eagles-led lineups. And just to give you an idea of some of the ownership, because Jalen Hurts is only $10,000, which is way too cheap for the kind of projection that he brings, he is going to be by far the most popular player, whether it's at captain or using him at flex with one of those skill position guys at the captain spot. Those are going to be your most popular Eagles lineups. And unfortunately, at least out here for tonight's slate, I tend to agree with that kind of build. Without AJ Brown, you're going to have some obvious value on guys like a Goddard, Devonta Smith, who we've already talked about before. And unless you're getting to a Saquon Barkley at captain, maybe an Eagles defense at captain to go out there and get real different, you're going to have a little bit of trouble getting that leverage. So tonight, this is one to go out there, maybe leave a little bit of extra salary on the table, especially if you're going with that chalkier side of things with the Eagles. But now let's go player by player, and perhaps my most intriguing option out there on the Eagles would be the most overpriced one, a Saquon out there at $10,600. It's not like he projects poorly at that kind of price tag, but guys like a Bijan Robinson have a higher points per dollar value. You can see Jalen Hurts at nearly 2.5x value, which is just ridiculous for one of those top tier options. At the captain position in particular, you can see I still got him like 45.5% out there at flex, but at captain, he's only just over 10% owned. So if you're going to try and take some Eagles heavy lineups tonight, maybe even a 5-1 full onslaught, using Saquon at the captain spot and then maybe the Eagles defense out there at flex could be a slightly sneaky way to go out there and do so. So wanted to mention that with Saquon. In general, I'm much higher on the Eagles than I am the Falcons. In fact, almost all my lineups are going to be at least 4-2 Eagles onslaughts. So guys like Bijan, guys like Kirk Cousins, Drake London are usually going to be buybacks out there in my lineup. So I think Bijan's a really good buyback option even at $10,400 because he has plenty of receiving upside out of the backfield. And while he would be a much better projecting player out there in scripts where the Falcons are going to go out there and lead, he's going to get a bunch of rushing usage. I could see him getting there with 4 or 5 catches for 40-50 yards. So I don't want to completely roll him out of the equation, but I would say if you're playing Bijan Robinson, he's especially useful if you think the Falcons have a chance tonight. If for some reason, or if maybe you're bold enough to go out there and play some 4-2 Falcons-led lineups, Bijan Robinson would be a clear choice out there at the captain spot. And I think if you're building Falcons-led lineups, he's probably your highest exposed player out there in those kind of builds. Jalen Hurts is the best play on the slate, bar none. There is no doubt about it. The only downside to playing Jalen Hurts tonight is the 86% combined ownership mark. He's way too cheap. He's nearly at that 2.5x mark, which makes somebody a near lock out there in large field GPPs. And tonight, I probably won't have a lineup that doesn't have him in there. So he's pretty much a lock for me, just kind of deciding whether I'm going to play him out there at flex or the captain position. Over here on the right, you guys can see that the player pool is blacked out. I'm going to be giving you guys a few ideas, right, of the guys that I'm getting to, but for my entire player pool, all of these projections as they change, right, updates after we get the Johnny Wilson news a little bit later on, make sure to check out the Patreon page. There's a link in the description of the video to that, where you can go on there. It's only $15 a month to join the NFL DFS tier, here, and on there is how you get these spreadsheets. So you get them for Monday Night Football, Thursday Night Football, Sunday Night Football, all the different Showdown slates that we have, and also the main slate out there on Sunday. So check it out if you guys haven't already, and that's where you can see exactly who I'm playing and how I'm using them out there in lineups. And on top of just my player pool, we've got the kind of scripts that I'm using them in, the kind of, things I'm considering when using a player in that kind of script. Core play, so whether I'm using them in my higher dollar stuff, and then even an extra tab over here just to yap even more about the player. So if you want all of my takes out there on the entire field, that's the best place, the best place to find it. Oh, a little bit of a tongue twister there, huh? Let's move down a little bit further down the board. So we already talked about these top 3 players. We've got Kirk Cousins here at $9,000. I think it's a fair price tag. He looked really rusty out there against the Steelers, but if you're going to play some Falcons heavy lineups, he's only like 40% owned out there between both positions. So I don't think he's over owned. I think he's actually a decent leverage spot if you're going to buy in on the Falcons. But if you are playing some Eagles heavy lineups, it's tough to want to play a Kirk Cousins as one of those few buybacks that you're taking. Devonta Smith is going to project off the board with A.J. Brown out. So he's only $8,800. If we got the news earlier in the week, he'd probably be at least $10,000. So kind of like Jalen Hurts, I don't think you have to overthink it all that much. He's high owned. He is there at about 62% combined ownership, but I think that's fair given the projection and the kind of price tag that you're getting on him for tonight. Drake London here at $7,800 is probably my favorite buyback option out there on the Falcons. I prefer him over Bijan mostly because of the price tag. Because I'm using Jalen Hurts in almost every single lineup, it's going to be a little bit tougher to go out there and try and take 3 guys that are 10K plus with just a $50,000 max salary to use. So somebody like a Drake London, just a little bit easier to go out there and fit into builds. And if they are going to be more pass heavy with the Eagles controlling the game, as a majority of my lineups will be built on that kind of script, then Drake London's going to get some extra usage in that kind of situation. So he would be, a very solid option to get to as a buyback. And same thing with Kyle Pitts here at $6,800. Another guy that is going to see an increased workload out there if they're playing from behind. And 42% out there on the Drake London, that is a relatively high ownership number, especially for one of the Falcons players. But 28% out there on Kyle Pitts isn't all that bad. And his 3.5 receptions line is juiced towards the over on a lot of books. So seemingly the books have him getting some usage out there tonight. Dallas Goedert, $5,800. If you want to get a little bit sneaky out there with the Eagles in terms of this mid-tier range, I guess 40% is a little bit lower owned than like the 60% you have on Devonta Smith, right? The 60% on a Barkley or 80% out there in a Hurts. But he should see some extra usage out there with A.J. Brown out of the fold. Now, is he going to see a massive uptick in usage? Maybe not, because he's always on the field anyways, out there with a bunch of really good wide receivers for the Eagles. But if it's going to give him an extra 5% target share, then, that's just an extra boost, right? It's not a bad thing to go out there and have some extra usage to work with. Now, am I counting on it being like a 10 to 15% increase? Absolutely not. So I think he's a solid play at $5,800. You could even use him at the captain spot if you wanted to, if he can go out there and score a few touchdowns. You've got Darnell Mooney, who I think is a little bit overpriced here. If I was higher on the Falcons, I'd probably have a little bit more Darnell Mooney, but as is, because I'm a little bit more Philly heavy, I would much rather have a Dallas Goedert or even spend the extra $1,400 and get an extra Kyle Pitts. The kickers are okay plays. They're never great plays out there for any given slate. Usually relatively high floor, but capped when it comes to their ceiling. I do like the Eagles defense, particularly in like 5-1 onslaughts. Jahan Dotson is a great value with A.J. Brown out. Would probably have been like $6,500 if we got that news a little bit earlier. So though he's coming with some ownership, you can see I've got him at just under 30% combined ownership. I think that's okay. I mean, you're going to get some chalk on this Eagles team, particularly with A.J. Brown out. And if you're playing some Eagles heavy lineups, I don't think you have to avoid guys like Jahan Dotson. Tyler Algier would be really good in a Falcons heavy lineup. He's a more rushing heavy player out there for the Falcons. And if they get leads, I mean, you saw it out there in 2023, they used Algier to go out there and pound out the clock quite a bit. So he's the sort of player that would benefit from the Falcons going out there and controlling time of possession, which I'm not counting on tonight. So you can probably tell what I'm doing out there with Tyler Algier. But if I was playing some real low owned Falcons stacks, he would probably be a part of that out there in some of those kind of builds. Falcons defense, I don't have interest in, but once again, if I was on the Falcons side a little bit more, I probably would have them out there in a few lineups. And I have to say, the correlation between Algier and the Falcons defense is massive. So if I was playing some of those sneaky kind of lineups, it'd probably have those two in a few of them. Ray McCloud, if I was going to take a Falcons wide receiver, the one that I prefer, the one that I plan on getting exposure to is Ray McCloud. He's $2,000 cheaper, actually $2,400 cheaper than what you have with Darnell Mooney. And you can see I've got him projected for 7.1 fantasy points as opposed to 8.9 out there for Darnell Mooney. So that salary means a whole lot. It lets me go from like a 7K guy up there to maybe like a $10,000 Jalen Hurts, which could be massive out there when it comes to my lineup construction. A Kenneth Gainwell, not the worst play out there for the Falcons, for the Eagles, not the Falcons out there. Getting my birds mixed up out there with this video. But yeah, Kenneth Gainwell, he'll get some usage out there behind a Saquon Barkley, but if they're winning by like 21 or more, he'll probably get even more usage because of some of that. A Grant Calcaterra, backup tight end for the Philly, probably not going to have that much usage out there, so more of a GPP flyer if anything. Will Shipley, third string running back out there for the Eagles, probably not going to see much usage. These wide receivers though, so a Covey, a Wilson, and then a Paris Campbell out there for Philly. If you're looking for a pure punt play tonight, it's probably one of these three. They're not going to see a ton of snaps. They're still playing behind Dotson, and then Devonta will be the number one wide receiver tonight. But if they can get on the field and happen to turn that small set of snaps into a big play, maybe a 40-50 yard play, maybe even a touchdown down there in the red zone, that could be enough to pay off this kind of price tag. So I wouldn't be playing them in like cash entries, or especially not in like big dollar single entry kind of lineups, but in large field GPPs, especially if Johnny Wilson plays, he's probably my favorite out of the bunch in terms of a pure punt towards the bottom end of the board. And now for the prop side of things, where we can find you some value over there on Underdog and Prize Picks. And just as I said over there with the DFS section, if you want all the prop exposure I'm getting to, make sure to check out the Patreon page for that. It is only $15 a month, and you can get access to all of the prop slips as I'm entering them, as well as all the reasoning and thought process behind getting to them. That'll teach you how to be a better in general, help give you a better process out there for your NFL bets, and hopefully at some point we'll let you move on from a Patreon page and let you take some of your bets yourself. But for the sake of this video, let's go over a few pieces of exposure that I'm getting to tonight. So first off, it's going to be this Drake London over on receiving yards, and I did get this at 56.5 personally, so if you're over there on the Patreon page, you did get a 1 yard better projection, but even at this number, I'd still take his over. He is over here at, I believe, is 60.5 yards over here on the Prize Pick side. So yeah, you can see that here there at 60.5 yards. And other books, he's at 60.5 and sometimes even juiced towards the over. So with the Philly being favored tonight, with the Falcons potentially having to play from behind, I like the fact that they're going to have to throw it very often. His receptions line, by the way, it's at 4.5, and it was juiced, I believe, minus 160 towards the over the last time that I looked at it. So they're essentially expecting him to go out there and get 5+ receptions, or at least probably right around 5 if we're using the projections literally, and he averages well over 15 yards per reception, just to say 2023 he averaged that many yards per reception. Not so much with Kirk Cousins in week 1, so hopefully he can be a little bit more efficient out there with his receptions this time around, and I think the game script is going to play into his favor as well. Then we also got this over on Saquon Barkley rushing yards, which I also got at 76.5, so that was 1 yard better over there on the Patreon page. Doesn't make that much of a difference though, as you'll see over here in Prize Picks, we're taking the same lines but even higher actually over there. But yeah, the 1 yard difference, not a big deal, I would say, out there in terms of the hit rate. But what I like with Saquon is the fact that the Eagles are favored. That would, lead to more rushes out there for Saquon if they could go out there and get some sort of a lead. And the Falcons last week, I would know this as a Steeler fan, could not plug a leak out there with the rushing game. You had Jalen Warren, Najee Harris go out there and just run all over that Falcons defense. And now you've got a better O-line for the Eagles. You've also got Saquon, who's a better running back than both Najee Harris and Jalen Warren. I'll admit that as a Steeler fan, it's not even close, right? Saquon is like twice the running back of those two. He should torch this defense, especially if the game script is going to favor the Eagles out there as well. So I think that this line might be 15 yards too low. Like, it, honestly, in my projections have him closer to like 90 yards rushing, and that'll be especially useful here in a few minutes when we get to Prize Picks. And in terms of Prize Picks, it is the same two props, but it is their demon props over here on this side. It's an over on Drake London at 74.5 and an over on Saquon Barkley at 89. 9.5. And though we don't have the exact alt lines to compare in every single sports book, this 5.25x payout, which is essentially a plus 425 parlay, is better than almost every sports book that I've checked so far. So you might be able to find a site that'll give you slightly better odds with some of these alt lines, but these demon props, while they're usually negative EV compared to some of the sports books, it's actually plus EV this time around. Now, these alt lines, right, the juice on books screw you to begin with, so it's not like you should really be using those as like hard facts on whether this is a quote unquote like plus EV slip or not. This is just one that I think is going to hit, right? Frankly, I think the Eagles are going to win this game pretty handily tonight, and I think they're going to have to rush the ball all over that Falcons defense. You saw the Steelers give him that blueprint the week before, and if he's going to get the ball 20 plus times, 90 yards is nothing for Saquon. So I feel pretty good about that. It's only 12 yards higher than his regular line, so well, that's an extra like 3 carries that he can go over that. I feel pretty solid about this demon prop over there for Barkley. And then this Drake London one's the one that's a little bit more sketchy, right? It's at 74.5 yards, essentially has to get to 75 plus. That's a little bit less than 20 higher than his receiving line, but the same thing I said about him getting some of those deep, downfield targets, if he can get us one of those 20 to 30 yard receptions, I don't really have an issue with this, right? He's got that 5 receptions line. If they're playing from behind, they're going to have to pass the ball even more than what these books are projecting for. So at the 74.5, this is the one that we're going to be sweating, I think, a little bit more than Saquon, at least if the script goes our way. But I still think there's a good chance he can go out there and get it done. So I believe his 70 plus alt line was plus 135 out there on Draftkings. Actually, it might have even been plus 130 the last time I checked it. This is 4.5 yards higher. So obviously the juice would be a little bit more, but the payout on most books for this combination was like plus 250 to plus 300. This is playing plus 425 when it comes to the payout. So I thought that was a pretty decent one to go out there and mix in, especially if the script that we're playing goes out there and bakes out in our direction. Alrighty guys, that is all I've got for this week's Monday Night Football preview. Hopefully you feel a little bit more prepared out there for tonight's action. Go ahead, smash that like button if you guys haven't already, and also subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the content to come. That'll include our Thursday Night Football breakdown, which will be dropping either tomorrow or early over there on Wednesday, as well as our main slate preview, Monday Night Football preview out there for next week. You guys know the deal. If you don't want to miss anything, hit that subscribe button, smash that like button as I said, and let's go out there and have ourselves a night. If you want to earn a free month of my Patreon page to go ahead and earn a chance of that, go ahead and give me their top score out there on tonight's Showdown slate. If you can give me the top score and their score within 2 fantasy points. So last time we did it within 1 was way too difficult. I empathize with you guys. If it's within plus or minus 2 points of your projection, you will win that free month of the Patreon page. And if people are going out there guessing the same player, whoever has the closest projection guess will be the one that wins the free month of the Patreon page. So, for the sake of this, I'm going to say Jalen Hurts 28 fantasy points. My guess will not count towards tonight's contest, but do something like that, right? Give me the player, give me the points afterwards, and you'll be entered in and eligible to win that free month of the Patreon page. I appreciate you guys. Thank you for all the support on the channel as per usual. Let's go out there, have ourselves a night, and let's get after it for the rest of this football season.